I experienced lots of anti-Semitism before the war. I lived in a bad city in Poland. I had to fight my way to high school almost every day and going back home. There was a beautiful city park, and in 1935 there were signs on the city park: Jews and dogs not allowed. It was a very nice city, 75,000 people. A third of the population was Jewish. I attended a Hebrew high school. It was the best high school in the city. It was a private school. I had to take 4 languages in high school in order to graduate. My older brothers all graduated from that high school. It was a beautiful life. My parents were very nice people. In the business they had 100 employees and they treated them very well. My oldest brother was a CPA, graduated from the University of Warsaw. My second oldest brother was an attorney, graduated from the University of Warsaw. My third brother was a businessman. He had his own business. My third brother was 18 when the Nazis invaded Poland, and I was 16. All schools were closed, all newspapers were closed, radios confiscated. In 1940, there was a roundup. The SS picked up young men. A neighbor of ours, 2 young ladies, screamed to the SS and pointed a finger at our house, and they were screaming, "Jude." So the SS came into our house and took me and my 2 brothers to the assembly place. The assembly place was in the synagogue. They assembled 600 young men. We were there 2 days, and they took us to the train station, put us in cattle cars, 80 people in a cattle car, and transported us to Lublin. The conditions in the cattle car were bad. All we had is only our clothes, what we had when they picked us up. They closed the doors and the little windows, and it was hot. It was terrible. But we were young, mostly young people, between 16 and 40. And when we arrived in Lublin, they took us out from the boxcars, and we had to march. Assessment from both sides with machine guns and whips. And my brother was dressed up very fancy, very nice, and an assessment beat him with a whip quite a few times. We had to run, not walk. We were running to the SS barracks. And when we arrived in the SS barracks, he took off his shirt and his back was black, bloody from the whips. We were there 2 days, and they sent us to Hrubieszów by train again, cattle cars. Hrubieszów is not far from Lublin. It's about 40 miles from Lublin. They took us in Hrubieszów on trucks, and we were driving through the city of Hrubieszów. It was a Saturday, and the Jewish people were throwing down apples and challah. They took us to a small village in Poland The name is Mirce, and we were building a highway for the Nazis. There were about 2,000 people in that camp. The food was adequate, but the conditions to sleep were terrible. After we were there 2 weeks, we had lice. We didn't have any showers, no bathrooms. We had latrines. And the lice were big like the little pinkies. Big lice. They were eating us alive. Terrible conditions. We worked 10 hours a day. We had to walk to work with shovels and picks and all kinds of equipment. We were building the highway without machines. I worked in the store for 3 months, and there was another roundup. My older brother and I, we were taken again to the synagogue, and the chief of police was a very brutal man. In the synagogue there was a selection. I went 20 miles away from the city to a stone quarry, and I was dressed up very nice. I had beautiful clothes on, and I had tall boots up to my knees, leather boots. And an ethnic German with a machine gun came over to me in that camp and asked me to go in a barrack to make fire. It was winter. It was March of 1941. And I knew that he would kill me. He liked my jacket. I had a brown jacket, a leather jacket, and a pair of fancy pants and the boots. And in the barrack I found a Pole that used to work for my father. And I went over to that Pole and I said, Kazik, you have to help me. I have to escape from here. And he knew me. He said, my truck is parked on the highway. When it gets dark, go over to the truck and lay down, flat, so nobody would see you. And I did that. He took me back to the city. Before we entered the city, he told me to jump down from the truck because German patrols were checking every truck that came into the city. And I knew the city real well, so I walked home. It was Friday night, and my parents thought that a ghost came by. They couldn't believe their eyes that I escaped before I was registered. They didn't know even who I was in the camp. They registered the people in the evening. So I had experiences already. I escaped already twice from the Nazis. I wasn't afraid of them. I was tough. In April of 1941, the Jewish population, 28,500 people, had to move into the ghetto. The ghetto was in the slums of the city, where before the ghetto was created, only 6,000 people lived there. And they moved in 28,500 people. We received an apartment together with another family of 8 people. We were 4, my parents and my brother and I, and they were 8. So we got a smaller room, the kitchen, and they got the bedroom. The ghetto was sealed with a fence, guarded by Jewish police inside the ghetto, Nazi police and Polish police outside the ghetto. You could leave the ghetto to go to work under a police escort or with special papers from the German authorities. People went out to work in German factories that were confiscated from Jewish people. They had to make a living, so they went out, and on the way back home they bought some groceries from Polish people. Life was tough in the ghetto. People were starving in the ghetto. Many people were arrested, prominent people, doctors, lawyers, teachers were arrested. Many of them were killed. Many were put in jail, and some were sent to Auschwitz. My brother and I, we were forced to go to work in a stone quarry. A typical day of work was very hard work in the stone quarry. Some people got hurt. They were cutting stone from a mountain. It was dynamite. It was dangerous work. And then the big stones had to be cut in small stones and loaded on trucks, open on the top, and the Germans needed these stones to build highways. We lived in the ghetto until August of 1942. The 20th of August, the ghetto was sealed completely. Nobody could go out from the ghetto to work in the factories anymore. And the Nazis split the ghetto in three parts. At that time, from the 28,000 people that moved into the ghetto, 28,500, there were only 19,000 people left. Many people died. Many people were sent away to different camps, slave labor camps. August 20 was the first deportation. They took out 1/3 of the ghetto, put them in cattle cars and sent them away. The second deportation was the 22nd of August. Another part of the city was deported, and we went with the third one. Our parents and both brothers and my brother's wife. And we were walking with our parents, 10 abreast, and on a street called Oksheya, we were pulled out by the Gestapo, my brother and I. The rest of the column went towards the train. My parents went to Treblinka. My brother with his wife went to Treblinka too.
Your brother shot?
My uncles, my aunts, my cousins, everybody went to Treblinka. Nobody was left, just I and Charles. My father said, live and take revenge. He knew already at that time. Out of the 19,000, they left 1,500 to work for the Nazis. They needed slaves. We lived in a small ghetto, and we still went to work in the same quarry. Because we worked in that stone quarry, we had papers. That's why they left us. We were lucky. In the little ghetto we stayed from August 1942 till June of 1943. And that little ghetto was liquidated. My brother and I, we walked in a column to be sent to a factory to work. And behind a big building, I saw Ukrainians in black uniforms with machine guns. I was sure they're going to kill us. So I pulled the sleeve from my brother and I told him, run after me. Didn't have time to talk to him. I said, run after me. He didn't run. He was sent to a bad concentration camp. I escaped and I went back to the big column that was still standing at the assembly place. From the 900 people that they left in the city, they split them in 3 different factories. Ludwikov had 300 people. Henrikov, where I was, a woodworking factory, 300 people. And the third factory was Hasag, also 300 people. Henrikov was a big furniture factory before the war that belonged to the president of the Jewish Council. But the Nazis were making little wagons over there for the German army. They didn't make furniture anymore. We received about 800 calories a day. We received bread, we received a soup. Once in a while we received, in the soup they had horse meat from dead horses. I didn't eat that meat, I threw it away. I just ate the soup, potatoes. During the deportation from the small ghetto, they took away all the children, little kids that belonged to the Jewish policemen and the people that worked for the Nazis that were left. The tailors and shoemakers, they were working, and they were allowed by the first deportation to have their wives and children still there. Some women that worked for them too. And during that selection from the small ghetto, they took away all the children, and some of the mothers, I witnessed one of the mothers was screaming at the officers. She said, murderers, baby killers. She went with the children to be killed the same day. And quite a few mothers did that. There was one man that saved his little girl, a 2-year-old girl, in his knapsack. And during that selection, they took her away from him. These were my heroes. There was lots of resistance in the ghettos. There were uprisings in the ghettos. There was an uprising in the Vilna ghetto. There was an uprising in Białystok ghetto. There was an uprising in the Warsaw ghetto. There were 3 uprisings in extermination camps. There was an uprising in Treblinka in 1943. Out of the 1,000 people that worked in Treblinka, 23 people survived the uprising. There was an uprising in Sobibor. They murdered all the SS that were guarding them, and 300 people survived from Sobibor. In 1944 there was an uprising in Birkenau. They destroyed, the Sonderkommando destroyed 4 crematoriums. They were all murdered. Not one survived. I was in Henryku 5 months, and I met a nice young Polish lady, and she told me that she will help me to escape. She will hide me in her parents' home. One night, on the 5th of December 1943, I cut the fence, and then I jumped another fence, and I went back to my old house, to a neighbor. I spent over there a half day at that neighbor's, a nice older lady. She fed me. She used to wash clothes for my parents. And another lady came in, and she said 4 Polish women were arrested because a Jew escaped from the factory. Well, she didn't recognize me, but I knew her real well. I didn't say a word. The lady that offered to help me, Aninka Haloń was her name. After I found out that she was arrested, I went to another friend of mine, and I spent the night at his neighbor's barn, and I slept with a goat in the barn. The next morning, I went back to the small ghetto where I had hidden a small gun, a Belgium gun, a 6-cylinder. I could have hold it in my hand and nobody would see it. It was a little gun. But a fellow, before I got to the gun, before I took it out, a fellow recognized me that worked with me in Henryków, and he called the Polish police. 5 policemen came over and took me back to the factory. I witnessed hangings in that factory when people escaped and they were caught. Quite a few people were hanged in the factory, and everybody had to watch. When I went back to the factory, I received another beating and the worst job in the factory. Henryków was liquidated in 1944 in June, and the other 2 factories in the city were liquidated too. We were all sent in cattle cars to Birkenau, Auschwitz-Birkenau. When the train rolled in into Birkenau, we knew where we were. We were inside a camp, surrounded with SS-men, and there was a selection right away. Most of the people went to the gas chamber. We had to undress, and the ones that were still strong were left to work as slaves for the Nazis. In Birkenau we went to the Canadian camp. The reason they called it the Canadian camp because all the transports came over there and people brought all kinds of food with them from outside, and clothing, beautiful clothing, and money and jewelry that they still had, and everything was taken away in the Canadian commando. We had to go through the shower. Before we went to the shower, we were shaved completely. They put on Lysol on us. The Germans tried to keep us clean. Lysol on our heads and all over the body. And then we went to the shower and we went out through a different door. We never saw our clothing again anymore. We were given striped uniforms and wooden shoes. We couldn't recognize each other anymore. When we were taken out from the Canadian commando, we went to the gypsy camp. And in the gypsy camp they tattooed us with numbers. No more names, but numbers. The Nazis tried to bring us down to the level of animals. We had the same number on our jacket in the front and in the back.
What is your tattoo number?
My number is B3266, tattooed on the left arm. B stands for 200,000. Only the people that became slaves had numbers. The other people that went to the gas chambers were not tattooed. They didn't have time to tattoo them. In Birkenau, the Nazis were murdering 20,000 people a day. Trainloads with Jews were coming in from all over Europe, from France, Holland, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Austria, Germany, Hungary, Romania, Poland, Lithuania, Russia. We were in Birkenau 3 days, and we walked by the gas chamber. The Sonderkommando was ready to take us into the gas chamber, but the Nazi officers that were guarding us told them that we are going to work. They sent us with trucks to Trzebina, an oil refinery, 16 miles away from Auschwitz. In Trzebina, we were in barracks, and we were there a few days, and the oil refinery was bombed, completely destroyed by American planes. The end of our barrack was hit also. Nobody was hurt, but the barrack was damaged. The Nazis started to build a new refinery. We had to work to clean up the old one. The fire was burning for quite a few days. We received 300 calories per day. in that camp in Trzebina. 5 o'clock in the morning we had to get up, and they called it an appel, and the SS came out at 7. We had to stay outside for 2 hours before they came, and they took us to work, 25 people or 50 people sometimes. In Trzebina the barracks were surrounded with high-powered electric wires, just like in Birkenau. You could not escape, because if you touched the wires, you were electrocuted. We were 800 people in the camp, and during the 6 months that we were there, 200 people died from starvation. The 17th of January 1945, they liquidated the camp. They took us on a death march. We walked all night to Auschwitz. And when we came to Auschwitz, some people that couldn't walk were shot and pushed down the road into a ditch by the SS men. And in Auschwitz they asked, who cannot walk? 100 people came forward out of the 600. And we thought they will take him to Auschwitz, to the camp, and they will kill them. And the rest of us, we walked the rest of the day. So we walked a night and a whole day, and in the evening we stopped to rest in barns, about 10 miles away from Auschwitz. And there was a fellow from the Czech Republic. His name was Ernst Tauber. He was the secretary in the camp. The same night before we stopped in Trzebina, the camp commandant, Karl Prosio, escaped with 2 of my friends. There was nobody beside him on a high position, so he had permission to go and check if the people received food in the barns. There were 5 barns that they split us up, and I went with him. And I told Ernst Tauber, we were planning to make an uprising, but some of the strong men that were still able to make an uprising said, no, let's wait. Well, so we decided to escape, Ernst Tauber and I. We watched the SS that was checking the barn. They were watching from the outside. When they were walking away, we jumped an 8-foot fence, and the snow covered our tracks. We were lucky. I jumped over the fence easy, but my friend was a little bit clumsy. He was hung on the barbed wire, and he called me that he needs help, so I went back, and we were running not in a straight line, but a zigzag. We thought maybe with the machine guns they wouldn't catch us. Maybe they wouldn't kill us. We walked a few hours through the fields, not through the highway. And when we saw a truck not too far away from the highway, we lay down in a ditch. So we knew that there were only Germans that had trucks and cars. We saw the light before they could see us. And then we walked. We ended up in a small village. The name of the village is Kielce. We found a little house. It was still Polish territory, and we crawled in the barn through a little window. We hid ourselves. We dug ourselves into the hay, deep into the hay, because it was 10 below zero. We laid in that barn for 5 days and 5 nights. We didn't eat, we didn't drink, we didn't have to go to the restroom. We decided to go out and to knock on the door of the house. We figured Polish people lived there. an old lady opened up the house, and she had 2 daughters that lived with her in a duplex. The husbands of the 2 daughters were in the Nazi army. These people were ethnic Germans that lived in Poland from before the war. They were farmers. Nice people. They treated us wonderful, gave us lots of food. They gave us shaving equipment. We didn't have any shaving equipment. We had beards already. 5 days we laid in the bug. They didn't know that we were Jewish, but they knew that we were from a concentration camp, from the striped uniforms, and there was a death sentence for harboring an escapee from a concentration camp. The Nazis didn't take you to court. So they told us, after they fed us, and they were very nice, they told us to go back in the barn and they will bring breakfast into the barn for us. They could have brought the police, but they didn't. They brought breakfast. Food that we didn't see for years.
Like what?
Hot milk, chocolate milk, cheese, bread and butter. We didn't see that for a long time. Good bread. And they told us when it gets dark, come back to the house. They were afraid of the neighbors. Just wonderful people. But they also gave us the bad news, that they are afraid to keep us there. They offered us civilian clothes from their husbands. They gave me a hat, and they gave my friend a hat. We were shaved like prisoners. I had a little sports cap and he had a regular hat. And they even told us which way to go towards the Russian front. And we walked for hours. Nobody would let us in a house to warm up. In the evening we saw a light in a farmhouse. We went over there. The Nazi escaped. It was a big farm. The Nazi escaped, and the Polish owner came back. He didn't know who we were. I was Polish. My friend was Czech. I could speak Polish just as good as the Poles, even better. And we stayed over there. We helped him with chores on the farm. He was mad at the Germans because they stole his cows. They left him 2 cows. They stole all his pigs. They left him 2 pigs. We were there 3 days, and a German patrol came in the morning and checked for IDs. We didn't have no IDs. And when he started asking for IDs, I slipped out through the back. I went back there through the barn. There was a little toilet in the barn. And I looked through a little window from that toilet, and I saw 2 assessmen with lanterns. It was still dark, early in the morning. And they were speaking. They said that I escaped. He escaped. In German. I speak well German. I was only in a shirt and a pair of pants and 10 below zero. I didn't have a place where to go. I decided I'll go back to the house from the barn, and I did. And that one officer, that assessment, asked me, "Where were you?" I said I had to go to the restroom. He didn't ask for the IDs anymore. He didn't ask any questions. Nothing. The Nazis escaped. The Russians came in. So we identified ourselves to a Russian officer. We told him who we were. We showed him the numbers on our arm. We asked him that he should give us a little paper so we could walk to the city of Auschwitz, because Russian patrols were walking on the highway. So he did. He gave us a piece of paper, and it was very nice. And we went to Auschwitz. And we found 100 people that couldn't walk in the hospital over there. And from there we went to Birkenau. It's only 2 miles away from one camp to the other one. In Birkenau we found a few people, not very many. And we went to a warehouse. We found some clothing. a pair of shoes and a sweater and a pair of pants and a jacket. And we found a little sled. We put everything on a sled and we walked back to the city. We had to cross a bridge, and on the bridge was Polish police. They took everything away from us. In Krakow, my friend Ernst Tauber found a few friends from his city, from Prague. We were there only one day. I told him I want to go back to my city. My city is liberated. Kielce. His city was not liberated. It was liberated in May. And this was the first week in February. So we said goodbye to each other. I didn't have his address, he didn't have my address. I went out on the highway, a Russian truck picked me up. Took me about 25 miles away from my city. Then I went up on a train. I went to a friend of ours, a boxcar again, a brother and a sister. And I went up on the train, nice people, to go to my city. Kinastowski. And in that boxcar, I already knew that I made a mistake. And Zygmunt Kinastowski. That I'm going back to my city. I spent the night over there with them. I was sitting in a corner, and the Jewish people in the city. Nobody knew who I was. We don't know. I didn't talk to nobody. And I heard Polish women talking that Hitler didn't kill all the Jews yet. But I went to my city anyhow. There was a curfew. I came into the city about 10 o'clock at night. At 8 o'clock there was a curfew. People couldn't walk anymore. But I walked. The next morning I went out on the city and I found a Jewish fellow that I knew. And I asked him if there are any Jewish people in the city. He said, yeah, 7 of us. I was in the city only 3 days. I couldn't live there. I couldn't stay there because the city looked to me like a cemetery. I went to my house. There was a Polish family living in my house. Nobody there to greet me, to give me a hug. And I knew the facts of life. I knew that I lost my family, only I didn't know about my brother from Russia or the brother from Lithuania or the brother that was with me in the camp. And with another fellow, we decided to go away from Kielce. We went to my wife's city, Sosnowiec, about 150 kilometers from my city. And we settled in the house where she and her parents used to live before the war and during the war. We knew each other only 2 weeks. I guess we fell in love. We decided to leave Poland. We didn't want to live in Poland. We didn't want to live in Europe. We wanted to go to Palestine. I received an invitation to go to the Polish army. On the day when I was supposed to go to the Polish army, we crossed the border to the Czech Republic. Sala, her younger sister, and 5 of my friends. From the Czech Republic, we went to Austria, to Linz. In Linz we found the Jewish Brigade. The Jewish Brigade was a military outfit of Jewish soldiers attached to the British Army. And they told us that they will help us to go to Palestine. So we were with them. They took us from Linz to Salzburg. From Salzburg they took us to Mittenwald, Germany. We lived in Mittenwald 5 years in the house of a princess. She was a cousin of the Queen of Holland, an architect, an elderly lady, about 60. She was very nice. She rescued 2 Jewish women during the war. They lived in her house, Mrs. Gutmann and her daughter Steffi. We lived in her house 5 years. Then we moved to Munich. We were there a half year because all the American offices were in Munich. We had to go through medical exams and interrogations, lots of interrogations. And it took us a half year in Munich. And then finally we received the papers to go to the States. From Munich we went to Bremerhaven. We were there a few days and we boarded a ship, an American military ship, General Stewart. There were 1,500 people on the ship, and it took us 10 days to come to the United States. There are no words in the English language to describe it. The worst day was the deportation. During the 3 deportations from my city, they murdered 1,400 people. There were, beside the SS and the Gestapo and German police and German soldiers, there were Ukrainians and Lithuanians from the Einsatzkommando. They used target practice on babies and pregnant women. They terrorized the people, robbed them while they were alive and robbed them after they were dead. Before they sent the women in the extermination camps to the gas chamber, they humiliated them. They cut all her hair. They used the hair for submarines in Germany. They needed the hair. So they cut her hair and then they sent them into the gas chamber. When they were pulled out from the gas chamber, there were people that were pulling out their gold teeth with pliers. Never in the history of the world something like that happened. But somehow I survived, my wife survived. Between the two of us we lost 300 family members. My father came from a family of 12. They all had children and grandchildren. My mother came from a family of 7. My wife lost 3 married sisters and a married brother and her parents. She lost 7 nephews and 1 niece, many uncles, aunts and cousins. We don't talk about the Holocaust at home too much. We talked to the kids about the Holocaust when they were in high school. We didn't want to scare the kids. They knew a little bit, but they didn't know too many details. When they were in high school, they knew about it, what we went through. Their mother was 3 years in a concentration camp, and I spent all 6 years in hell. Now we live in paradise in Naples, Florida.